I never thought my life would unravel because of a swimming lesson. When people talk about mistakes, they rarely mention how small they can start, like the faintest ripple that grows into a tidal wave. For me, it began with a hand under the water, steadying my balance as I learned to swim in my own backyard pool. It's strange, looking back now, how something so mundane could become the centerpiece of a story I'd never dare tell anyone aloud. Except, of course, to you. His name was Jared Lowe. He was my son's best friend, and his laugh echoed through my house often enough that I barely noticed it anymore. Jared was one of those rare people who could light up a room without even trying, always full of jokes and energy. I never paid him much attention beyond being Aiden's guest. At least not until he offered to teach me how to swim. I should have said no. I could have laughed it off or politely declined. But I didn't. I said yes, and that yes changed everything. I don't know if I can explain what happened in the days that followed. Some of it felt inevitable, like gravity pulling me toward something I didn't understand. Other parts felt reckless, like watching myself from the outside, unable to stop. And then, there were the parts I couldn't have anticipated at all. The danger, the betrayal, the choices that brought me to where I am now. It wasn't just Jared, of course. He was the spark. But the fire spread farther than either of us could have imagined. I'm not even sure if I regret it. I think, maybe I regret everything else more. So, if you want to understand how my life unraveled, you'll have to start there. With the swimming lesson. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Jared made the offer. The summer heat had settled over the neighborhood like a thick blanket, the kind that left the air heavy and still. Aiden and Jared were lounging by the pool, tossing a volleyball back and forth while I sat under the shade of an umbrella with a book I wasn't really reading. "You don't swim?" Jared asked suddenly, breaking the rhythm of their game. I looked up, startled. His eyes were on me, bright and amused, as though the idea of someone not swimming was the most curious thing he'd heard all day. "I can swim," I replied, though my tone wasn't convincing even to me. "I just don't enjoy it." Jared tilted his head, his grin widening. "That sounds like code for I never learned." Aiden laughed, throwing the volleyball toward Jared. "She's always been scared of water," he said. "You should have seen her on vacations when I was a kid, always by the pool, never in it." "That's not true," I protested weakly. "I was just cautious." Jared stood, brushing water from his chest. "Well, lucky for you, cautious people make great learners. Come on, I'll teach you." The suggestion caught me off guard. I glanced at Aiden, half expecting him to dismiss it as a joke, but he just shrugged, clearly uninterested. "It's easy," Jared continued, his tone light, "and you've got a whole pool to practice in. What better place to start?" "I'm not sure," I began, but Jared was already stepping out of the water, extending a hand toward me. "Trust me," he said, his voice steady. "You'll be swimming laps in no time." It wasn't that I was truly afraid of water. I'd been in pools before, wading into the shallow end or floating with the help of an inflatable raft. But learning to swim? That felt like a challenge I'd avoided for so long it had become part of who I was. But Jared had a way of making things seem effortless, his confidence infectious. Before I knew it, I was standing at the edge of the pool, toes curled over the concrete as he demonstrated a few basic strokes. "Start with floating," he said, his voice calm and encouraging. "The hardest part is trusting the water to hold you up." I stepped into the water cautiously, the coolness shocking against my skin. Jared waded in beside me, his hands steadying my arms as I leaned back, letting myself float. "Good," he said, his voice close. "See? Not so bad." I felt the tension in my shoulders ease as I let myself relax, Jared's hands still firm beneath me. For a moment, I forgot how ridiculous I must have looked, a grown woman being taught to float in her own backyard. "You're a natural," Jared said, grinning. "Next thing you know, you'll be doing laps around Aiden." The mention of Aiden brought me back to reality. I glanced toward the house, half expecting to see him standing at the window, watching us, but the blinds were drawn, the yard quiet except for the faint hum of cicadas. We continued the lesson for another half hour, moving from floating to simple strokes. Jared's instructions were clear and patient, his tone always light-hearted but never patronizing. By the time we finished, I was more comfortable in the water than I had been in years. "You did great," Jared said as we climbed out of the pool. You just needed a little push. I laughed, wrapping a towel around myself. Maybe next time, I'll even try swimming on my own. Next time you'll be racing me, he replied, his grin wide. Over the next week, the swimming lessons became a regular part of Jared's visits. Aiden didn't seem to mind, spending most of his time scrolling through his phone or watching TV while Jared and I practiced in the pool. At first, I told myself it was just a way to pass the time, a harmless distraction from the monotony of my days. But as the lessons continued, I began to notice the subtle shift in our dynamic. Jared's compliments became more frequent, his laughter more intimate. He started finding excuses to linger after our lessons, sitting with me by the pool or helping me tidy up the patio. You're not like other moms, he said one afternoon, his tone casual but his eyes serious. I raised an eyebrow, half amused. Is that a compliment? It is, he replied, his grin softening. You're different, in a good way. I brushed off his words, laughing lightly, but a part of me couldn't ignore the way they made me feel. Seen, appreciated, even desired. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, as the sun dipped low in the sky, that the first crack appeared in the wall I had so carefully built around myself. We were sitting by the pool, the air warm and heavy with the scent of chlorine and blooming jasmine. Jared had just finished recounting a story from his college days, his laughter echoing through the yard. Thanks for this, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. For the lessons, and for everything. Jared turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. You don't have to thank me, he said softly. I enjoy spending time with you. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. I felt his gaze linger on me, the air between us charged with a tension I hadn't realized was there until that moment. I should have looked away. I should have said something to break the spell. But I didn't. The shift happened gradually, in moments so small and fleeting that I hardly noticed at first. A lingering glance, the brush of his hand against mine, a joke that felt just a little too personal. These were the cracks in the dam, each one weakening my resolve. The afternoon after that quiet moment by the pool, Jared returned to the house alone. Aiden had gone to visit a friend, leaving us with an excuse to have one more lesson. I thought you'd cancel, I said as I met him at the door, surprised to see him without Aiden in tow. Jared shrugged, his easy grin in place. I figured you'd need a break from Aiden's heckling. Besides, we've got work to do. There was a lightness to his tone, but as I followed him to the pool, I couldn't ignore the undercurrent of something else. Something unspoken and electric. We started as usual, Jared guiding me through new strokes, his hand steady as he corrected my form. But as the lesson went on, the air grew heavier, the spaces between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. You're getting good at this, Jared said after I finished a lap. He leaned against the pool's edge, his arms resting on the tiles as he watched me. I've got a good teacher, I replied, treading water. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft ripple of water and the distant hum of cicadas. When Jared finally broke the silence, his voice was quieter, more serious. Do you ever just let yourself relax? He asked. I frowned, caught off guard by the question. What do you mean? He shrugged, his gaze steady. You're always so composed, so in control. I just wonder if you ever let yourself stop thinking about everything. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I didn't let myself relax. Not fully, not since the divorce, not since the carefully constructed life I'd built had started to crumble around me. Before I could answer, Jared moved closer, his hand brushing against mine under the water. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. You deserve to, he said softly. You deserve to just let go. I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his voice, or the way his gaze seemed to strip away all the walls I'd built around myself. Or maybe it was the simple fact that, for the first time in years, I felt seen. Whatever it was, I didn't stop him when he leaned in. I didn't pull away when his lips brushed mine, soft and tentative at first, as if giving me a chance to decide. Instead, I kissed him back. It was a quiet, gentle thing. Nothing like the whirlwind romances I'd read about in books or seen in movies, but it felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. When we pulled apart, I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. This is a mistake, I whispered, my voice trembling. Maybe, Jared replied, his voice low, but it doesn't feel like one. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered confessions. Jared and I avoided Aiden as much as possible, finding excuses to meet when he wasn't around. We told ourselves it was just a fling, something that would fizzle out as quickly as it had begun. But it didn't fizzle. Instead, it grew, consuming every quiet moment I had. Jared became a fixture in my thoughts, his smile a constant presence in the back of my mind. We began meeting in the small guest house I used as a design studio, the only place where we could be alone without fear of discovery. I shouldn't be here, I said one evening as Jared pulled me into his arms. But you are, he replied, his voice warm and steady. And that's enough for me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this could be enough, that we could exist in this bubble of secrecy, without the outside world crashing in. But the guilt weighed on me, a constant reminder that we were standing on borrowed time. It didn't take long for Aiden to notice the change. He began asking questions, his tone light but his eyes sharp. You and Jared have been spending a lot of time together, he said one afternoon, his gaze lingering on me as we sat in the living room. Should I be worried? I forced a laugh, brushing off his comment. Don't be ridiculous. He's just been helping me with the pool. Aiden smirked, though his expression didn't quite reach his eyes. Right. Helping you with the pool. His words sent a chill through me, but I did my best to play it off. I told myself that Aiden was just being paranoid, that there was no way he could know the truth. But the tension between us only grew. Aiden began watching Jared more closely, his casual jokes taking on an edge that made my stomach twist. It all came crashing down one evening when Aiden returned home earlier than expected. Jared and I had been in the guest house, our guard lowered by the quiet of the evening. The sound of the door slamming was like a thunderclap, jolting us both out of the moment. Mom? Aiden's voice echoed through the space, sharp and demanding. I froze, my heart pounding as Jared pulled away from me, his expression a mix of panic and guilt. We have to, he began, but it was too late. Aiden appeared in the doorway, his face contorting as he took in the scene before him. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice rising. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The look in his eyes, hurt, anger, betrayal, was more than I could bear. Is this why you've been sneaking around? He continued, his voice shaking. With him? Jared stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Aiden, Don't, Aiden snapped, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Don't you dare try to explain this. He turned to me, his eyes blazing. I trusted you, Mom. I trusted both of you. And then he was gone, slamming the door behind him as he stormed out of the guest house. The silence that followed was deafening. Jared and I stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on us like a heavy blanket. I'll talk to him, Jared said finally, his voice weak. No, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. This is my mess. I'll deal with it. But as the hours passed and Aiden didn't return, I realized that fixing this wasn't going to be as simple as I'd hoped. The night after Aiden discovered us was one of the longest of my life. I sat in the living room, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. My phone sat on the coffee table, the screen blank despite the messages I had sent him. Please come home. We need to talk. I'm sorry. The words looked pathetic, even to me. I didn't know what to say, how to explain, or how to fix the chasm that had opened between us. Jared sat across from me, his face pale and drawn. He had offered to leave, but I told him to stay. At the time, I wasn't sure why. Maybe I was afraid of being alone. Maybe I thought his presence would help me feel less adrift. By morning, there was still no sign of Aiden. The guilt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless, as I stared out the window, watching the sunlight creep across the yard. What if he doesn't come back? I whispered. Jared, who had been pacing the room, stopped and turned to me. He will, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. But the hours stretched on, and by late afternoon, I couldn't take the waiting any longer. I'm going to find him, I said, grabbing my car keys. Jared hesitated. Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head. I need to do this alone. I found Aiden at a bar near the university, sitting at a corner table with a drink in front of him. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped and his hair disheveled. For a moment I hesitated, unsure if he would even speak to me. But then he looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and the anger in his expression made my heart sink. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp and cold. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Aiden laughed, a bitter sound that made my chest ache. "Talk about what? About how you're sleeping with my best friend?" I winced at his words, the bluntness of them hitting me like a physical blow. "It's not what you think," I began, but Aiden cut me off. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't try to justify it. You lied to me, both of you, and now you want to act like it's something I can just accept?" "It wasn't planned," I said, my voice breaking. "It just happened." "That's not an excuse," Aiden said, his eyes blazing. "You're my mom. He's my friend. Do you have any idea what this has done to me?" I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his expression hardening. "I trusted you," he said quietly. "I trusted both of you, and you betrayed me." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the truth was undeniable. I had betrayed him, and no amount of justification could change that. When Aiden finally spoke again, his voice was steady but filled with resolve. "I'm leaving," he said. "What?" "I can't stay in that house. Not with him there. Not with you pretending everything's fine." "Aiden, please," I said, my voice trembling. "Don't do this. We can work through this. We can—" "No," he interrupted. "You made your choice, Mom. Now I'm making mine." Before I could respond, he stood and walked away, leaving me sitting alone at the table. Aiden's departure cast a shadow over everything. He moved into a small apartment near campus, cutting off contact with Jared entirely. He spoke to me only when absolutely necessary, his tone distant and clipped. The guilt weighed heavily on me, but Jared seemed determined to act as if everything was normal. He continued visiting the house, his presence a constant reminder of the rift between me and my son. "We can get through this," Jared said one evening as we sat in the guest house. "Aiden just needs time." But time wasn't helping. The more days passed, the more I felt the strain of the situation pulling me in different directions. My relationship with Jared, once thrilling and intoxicating, now felt like a source of endless tension and uncertainty. The cracks in our relationship deepened when Jared's secret finally came to light. It happened during a quiet evening at the house, when a man I didn't recognize showed up at the door. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a cold, calculating gaze that made my stomach twist. "Is Jared here?" the man asked, his voice low and steady. I hesitated. "Who's asking?" The man smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Let's just say I'm someone he owes a favor." Before I could respond, Jared appeared behind me, his expression darkening when he saw the man. "Victor," he said, his tone tense. "Jared," Victor replied, his smirk widening. "We need to talk." After Victor left, I confronted Jared, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "Who was that?" I demanded. Jared sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," I said. "What's going on?" His gaze dropping to the floor. "I owe him money," he admitted. "Money?" "I made some bad decisions," he said, his voice quiet. "I got into gambling a while back and things spiraled." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't want to drag you into it," he said. "I thought I could handle it on my own." "But now he's here," I said, my voice rising. "What does he want from you?" Jared hesitated again, and the silence was enough to confirm my worst fears. "Jared," I said, my voice trembling. "How much do you owe him?" "Enough," he replied. "But I'll figure it out, I just need some time." Victor's presence loomed over us like a storm cloud. Jared became increasingly agitated, his confidence unraveling as the pressure mounted. I tried to help, offering to lend him money, but he refused. "I got myself into this mess," he said. "I'll get myself out." But his attempts to resolve the situation only seemed to make things worse. Victor began showing up more frequently, his demands growing more aggressive. The tension in the house reached a breaking point, leaving me feeling helpless and trapped. It was Aiden who ultimately forced the situation to a head. He showed up unannounced one evening, his expression hard as he stepped into the living room. "I heard about Victor," he said, his gaze shifting between me and Jared. "What the hell is going on?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain. But Jared, to his credit, didn't shy away. "I owe him money," Jared said. "I'm handling it." "Doesn't look like it," Aiden replied, his tone sharp. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Aiden accusing Jared of endangering me, and Jared firing back that Aiden had no right to judge. The argument grew heated, the tension in the room threatening to boil over. "Stop!" I finally shouted, my voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't solving anything." Aiden turned to me, his expression filled with frustration. "Mom, you need to get rid of him," he said. "He's a liability. He's putting you in danger." Jared bristled at the words, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. After Aiden's confrontation, the tension in the house became unbearable. Jared tried to convince me, and himself, that he could handle Victor, but his confidence seemed thinner with each passing day. "You don't have to be involved in this," he said one night as we sat in the guest house. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "It's my problem, not yours." "Don't lie to me," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "Victor isn't just your problem anymore. He's coming to this house. He knows where I live." Jared ran a hand through his hair, his frustration clear. "I'm going to fix it, I swear. I just need more time." "Time for what?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Jared, this isn't going away on its own, and you're dragging me into it whether you mean to or not." The weight of the situation was pressing down on me, suffocating in its intensity. A part of me wanted to tell Jared to leave, to put as much distance as possible between myself and his problems. But another part, the part that still cared for him, couldn't bring itself to let him go. A few days later, Victor made his intentions clearer than ever. He showed up at the house again, this time waiting until Jared wasn't home. I had just returned from a trip to the grocery store when I found him leaning against the front door, his cold smile sending a shiver down my spine. "Cecilia," he said, his voice smooth. "Nice to see you again." "What do you want?" I asked, clutching my keys tightly in my hand. Victor tilted his head, his smile widening. "I think you know the answer to that. Jared owes me, and I'm not a patient man." "He's trying to pay you back," I said, my voice trembling. "Trying isn't enough," Victor replied. "I want results, and if I don't get them soon, well, let's just say I don't mind taking collateral." The implication was clear, and it sent a wave of fear crashing over me. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Victor chuckled, stepping back toward the sidewalk. "You might want to tell Jared to hurry up. Tick-tock, Cecilia." When Aiden found out about Victor's latest visit, he was furious. "This is exactly what I was talking about," he said, pacing the living room. "You're in danger because of him." "I can handle it," I replied, though even I didn't believe the words. "No, you can't," Aiden snapped. "Jared's not going to fix this. He's a mess, Mom. He's always been a mess." His words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. Jared's charm and confidence had always masked a recklessness that I had chosen to overlook. "What do you want me to do?" I asked quietly. "Get rid of him," Aiden said. "Tell him to leave. You don't owe him anything, Mom. Not after everything he's put you through." But the idea of cutting Jared out of my life felt impossible. Despite everything, I still cared for him. I still believed there was good in him, even if it was buried beneath layers of bad decisions and desperation. That night, Jared returned to the house with a plan. "I have something Victor might take as payment," he said, his voice grim. "What is it?" I asked. Jared hesitated before pulling a small wooden box from his bag. Inside was a watch, elegant and clearly valuable. "It belonged to my grandfather," Jared said quietly. "It's worth enough to cover most of what I owe. Maybe all of it." I stared at the watch, my heart sinking. "Jared, are you sure about this?" "I don't have a choice," he replied. "It's either this or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. The next evening, Jared arranged to meet Victor at a secluded spot outside of town. I insisted on going with him, despite his protests. "If something goes wrong, I'm not letting you face him alone," I said firmly. Victor was waiting when we arrived, his car parked under a dim street lamp. He stepped out as we approached, his expression unreadable. Well, he said, his tone laced with amusement. "Look who decided to show up." Jared held up the box. "This is worth more than what I owe you. Take it and we're done." Victor opened the box, inspecting the watch with a critical eye. For a moment, I thought the plan might work. But then Victor's smile faded, and he closed the box with a snap. "This covers most of it," he said, his tone casual. "But not all of it." "What are you talking about?" Jared demanded. "That watch is worth a fortune." Victor shrugged. "Interest, Jared. You should have read the fine print. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel Jared's anger building. I don't have anything else, Jared said, his voice low. Victor's gaze shifted to me, and a chill ran down my spine. You've got her, he said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Jared stepped in front of me, his fists clenched. Don't even think about it. Victor laughed, but the sound was devoid of humor. Relax, Jared. I'm not interested in her, but you'd better figure something out, and soon. With that, he got back into his car and drove off, leaving us standing in the cold night air. The exchange with Victor marked a turning point in my relationship with Jared. The danger he had brought into my life was undeniable, and I could no longer ignore the toll it was taking on me. We can't keep doing this, I said one evening as we sat in the guest house. Jared looked at me, his expression pained. Cecilia, please. I'm going to fix this. I just need more time. I don't have more time, I replied, my voice trembling. I can't keep living like this, afraid of who's going to show up at my door, wondering if you're going to get yourself killed. Jared didn't respond, his gaze dropping to the floor. I care about you, I continued, my voice softening. But this isn't sustainable. You need to figure out your life, Jared, and I can't be a part of it anymore. Aiden's words echoed in my mind as I watched Jared pack his things. You did the right thing, Aiden said when I told him about the decision. He was never going to change, Mom. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. But even as I tried to convince myself that Aiden was right, part of me still felt the loss. Jared had been a mistake, yes, but he had also been a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, a reminder of who I used to be and who I could still become. When Jared left, the house felt emptier than ever. The danger Victor posed lingered in my mind, but with Jared gone, I hoped it would dissipate. Aiden began visiting more often, his presence a balm for the ache in my chest. Slowly, we started to rebuild our relationship, though the cracks left by the past few months would take time to heal. As for Jared, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had left town, moving to another state to start fresh. I wanted to believe he would find his way, that he would make better choices and build a life he could be proud of. But I also knew that his path was no longer tied to mine. The days after Jared left were eerily quiet. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my chest start to ease. Aiden was still distant, but he called more often, his tone softening with each conversation. I'm glad he's gone, Aiden said during one of our calls. Now you can focus on yourself again. I wanted to believe him, to trust that the worst was behind me. But the shadow of Victor lingered in the back of my mind. Jared had warned me before he left. Victor might not accept his absence as the end of the debt. One evening, as I prepared for bed, the doorbell rang. My heart sank as I approached the door, already knowing who would be on the other side. Victor stood there, his presence filling the space like a dark cloud. Evening, Cecilia, he said, his voice smooth. What do you want? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I think you know. Jared might be gone, but his debt isn't, and now it's your problem. Jared doesn't live here anymore, I said. That's irrelevant, Victor replied. You were a part of this, Cecilia. You benefited from him, didn't you? So now, you're responsible. My breath caught in my throat as his words sunk in. What do you expect me to do? I asked. Victor leaned in, his gaze cold. You'll pay me what he owes, or I'll make sure your life becomes very inconvenient. The next day I called Aiden, my voice shaking as I recounted Victor's visit. This is why I told you to stay away from Jared, Aiden said, his frustration clear. He's dragged you into a mess that isn't yours. I know, I said, tears threatening to spill. But what do I do now? Aiden was silent for a moment before replying. I'll handle it. Aiden, no, I said quickly. I don't want you involved in this. You're my mom, Aiden said, his tone firm. I'm not letting this guy ruin your life. Aiden arranged to meet Victor at a neutral location, an abandoned parking lot near the edge of town. I begged him to let me come, but he refused, insisting that he handle it alone. The hours ticked by slowly, each second stretching into an eternity as I waited for Aiden to return. When he finally did, his face was pale, but his expression was resolute. It's done, he said simply. What does that mean? I asked, my heart pounding. I paid him off, Aiden said. It's over. How? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. Aiden hesitated before replying. It doesn't matter. What matters is that he's gone. But something in his tone told me there was more to the story than he was letting on. A week later, I learned the truth. Aiden hadn't paid Victor off with money. He had gone to the police, reporting Victor's illegal activities and providing evidence that Jared had secretly collected before he left town. Victor was arrested, his threats finally neutralized. But the fallout left me shaken. The weight of everything. The affair, the danger, the choices I had made, pressed down on me like a heavy burden. You did the right thing, Aiden said when I confronted him about his actions. Did I? I asked, my voice trembling. Or did I just make everything worse? Aiden sighed, his expression softening. Mom, you're human. You made mistakes, but you're still my mother. And I'm not going anywhere. His words brought a small measure of comfort, but the guilt lingered, a constant reminder of the chaos I had allowed into our lives. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. The house, once filled with tension and fear, became a sanctuary again. Aiden visited often, our relationship slowly mending as we found common ground in the wake of everything we had endured. But even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy, I couldn't shake the memories of Jared. He had left without saying goodbye, disappearing into the horizon like a chapter I wasn't ready to close. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail, the handwriting unfamiliar. I opened it cautiously, my heart pounding as I unfolded the page. Cecilia, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you for everything. You saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and for that, I'll always be grateful. I'm trying to start over, to make better choices and become the person you believed I could be. Maybe someday I'll be able to prove to you that it wasn't all for nothing. Take care of yourself and tell Aiden I'm sorry. He deserved better from both of us. The letter brought tears to my eyes, a mixture of sadness and closure. Jared's presence had left a mark on my life, one I would carry with me always. One evening, as the sun set over the backyard, I sat by the pool with a glass of wine in hand. The water shimmered in the fading light, its surface calm and still. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The chaos of the past weeks had given way to clarity, a reminder of the resilience I hadn't realized I possessed. I thought of Jared, of the lessons he had taught me about vulnerability and risk. I thought of Aiden, of the strength he had shown in protecting me even when I hadn't deserved it. And I thought of myself, of the mistakes I had made and the growth that had come from them. Life would never be the same. But that was okay. The waters might be deep, but I had learned to swim. As the stars appeared overhead, I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me one last time. I had loved, I had lost, and I had learned. And in the end, that was enough. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Sitting in the corner of the break room at work, the faint hum of the vending machines the only sound in the room, I felt the heat of Deshawn's gaze on me. He was leaning against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest, his confidence so natural it bordered on arrogance. I should have left when the others filtered out, but something about the way he stayed behind made it impossible for me to move. Late nights seem to suit you, he said, his voice smooth and teasing. I looked up, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened under his attention. And here I thought you were the one burning the midnight oil. He grinned, his smile disarming. Can't lie. I was hoping you'd still be here. My breath caught. There it was, direct, unapologetic, and completely out of line. I should have said something, should have told him this was inappropriate. But instead, I just stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Evelyn, he said, his tone softening. You ever let someone tell you how incredible you are? Deshawn, I said quietly, warningly, but he didn't back down. He stepped closer, his dark eyes locked on mine, the scent of his cologne enveloping me. For a moment, I forgot who I was. Forgot I was his boss. Forgot I was 52 years old and should have known better. I'm serious, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. You're incredible. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something I hadn't felt in years. I wanted to tell him to stop, to step away, but the words caught in my throat. That was the moment everything changed. Deshaun wasn't the first younger man I'd been involved with. Since my divorce, there had been others. Brief, passionate, but ultimately meaningless encounters that filled a void I didn't want to admit I had. But Deshaun was different. He wasn't just confident. He made me feel something I hadn't felt in decades. Alive. I didn't realize it then, but that moment in the break room was the beginning of something that would unravel my carefully constructed life. I suppose I should start at the beginning, though I'm not entirely sure when it all truly began. Maybe it was the day Deshaun first walked into the conference room, a new hire with an easy smile and a self-assuredness that made the entire team sit up a little straighter. Maybe it was when I caught him looking at me during a meeting, his eyes lingering a second longer than they should have. Or maybe it was long before that, when I realized that after my divorce, loneliness had become less of a passing feeling and more of a permanent state of being. I'm Evelyn. 52 years old, divorced for nearly a decade, and a senior marketing director at Apex Interactive, a powerhouse in the gaming industry. It's a fast-paced, competitive environment, and I've spent the better part of my career proving that I belong here. My days are filled with deadlines, client calls, and late nights at the office. My evenings are quieter, spent in a small but comfortable apartment with the occasional glass of wine and a rerun of whatever show I can find. It's not a bad life, but it's not the one I'd imagined for myself either. My daughter Sophia is in her 20s now, building a life of her own on the other side of the country. We talk often enough, but there's a distance between us that wasn't always there. She sees me as strong, independent, and resilient, all the things I want her to see. What she doesn't see, what no one sees, is the part of me that craves something more. Deshaun was hired 6 months ago, part of a push to bring in fresh talent to our team. At 24, he was one of the youngest on the staff, but it didn't take long for him to stand out. He wasn't just good at his job, he was brilliant. His ideas were bold, his execution flawless, and he had a way of making people listen when he spoke. There was an energy about him, a confidence, that seemed to fill the room whenever he entered it. At first, I chalked it up to youth. He was at that stage in life where everything felt possible, where ambition and idealism hadn't yet been worn down by the realities of the world. But as the weeks went on, I started to notice other things. The way he smiled at me during meetings, as if we shared some unspoken joke. The way he sought me out for feedback on his projects, even when it wasn't necessary. The way he seemed to find excuses to be near me, whether it was lingering in the break room or asking me about a campaign I'd worked on years ago. I told myself it was harmless. He was young, ambitious, and eager to make an impression. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. The turning point came during a late-night brainstorming session. We were preparing for a major pitch, and the entire team had been working overtime to get everything ready. Most of the staff had gone home by 7 p.m., leaving just a handful of us in the office. I was at my desk, poring over the latest revisions when Deshaun appeared in the doorway. "Burning the midnight oil again?" he asked, leaning casually against the frame. "Deadlines wait for no one," I said, offering a faint smile. He stepped inside, holding up 2 paper cups of coffee. "Figured you could use this." I accepted the cup, the warmth of it seeping into my hands. "Thanks." "You didn't have to do that." "Consider it a peace offering," he said, his smile widening. "Peace offering for what?" "For stealing your idea in the meeting this morning," he said, his tone light but sincere. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You didn't steal anything, you built on it. That's what a good team does." His expression softened, and for a moment the playful edge in his demeanor faded. "You're good at this, you know, better than anyone here." The compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a flush rise to my cheeks. "I've been doing this a long time. Doesn't mean you're not brilliant," he said, his voice quieter now. I looked away, focusing on the papers scattered across my desk. "Flattery won't get you out of finishing your work." He chuckled, but he didn't leave. Instead, he pulled a chair up beside me, his proximity sending a flicker of unease through me. "Mind if I stay for a bit?" he asked. "I could use a second opinion on something." Suit yourself, I said, keeping my tone casual. For the next hour, we worked side by side, our conversation shifting between campaign strategies and the occasional personal anecdote. He told me about the small indie games he'd worked on before joining Apex, the passion projects that had driven him to pursue a career in the industry. I told him about my early days in marketing, back when gaming was still seen as a niche industry and women like me were a rarity in the field. You must have been tough as hell, he said, his admiration evident. You had to be, I said. But it was worth it. He nodded, his gaze lingering on me a moment longer than necessary. You make it look easy. It's not, I said quietly. His expression shifted, and for a moment the air between us felt different, charged in a way I couldn't quite define. I cleared my throat, breaking the tension. We should call it a night, I said, gathering my papers. It's late. Yeah, he said, standing. I'll walk you out. I didn't argue. As we stood in the elevator, the silence between us felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. When the doors opened, he held them for me, his smile warm and easy. Good night, Evelyn, he said, his voice soft. Good night, Deshawn, I replied, stepping out into the cool night air. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something I wasn't sure I could or wanted to ignore. The first time it happened, I told myself it was a mistake. An impulsive moment born of late nights, too many lingering glances, and a craving for something I hadn't felt in years. But even then, deep down, I knew it wasn't the last time. It started with a message. The week after our late-night brainstorming session, Deshawn texted me at nearly 10 p.m. Still up? Got something I want to run by you. I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't unusual for colleagues to exchange late-night work messages, especially in our industry, but this felt different. There was no subject line, no attachment, just a pretense thin enough to be see-through. Sure, I replied after a moment, trying to keep my tone neutral. Within minutes, my phone buzzed again. Meet me at Lux. Drinks on me. Lux was a sleek lounge downtown, more popular with our younger employees than someone like me. I hesitated, typing and deleting a dozen excuses before finally giving in. Just one drink, I replied, as if that would set some kind of boundary. When I arrived, he was already there, seated in a quiet corner with 2 glasses of red wine on the table. He stood when he saw me, his smile lighting up the dimly lit room. You came, he said, his tone warm but tinged with satisfaction. I figured you'd have something work-related, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. We can talk work, he said, leaning back with that effortless confidence. But that's not why I asked you here. I should have left right then. I should have made an excuse, reminded him, and myself, that this was crossing a line we couldn't uncross. But instead, I stayed. The conversation started innocently enough. We talked about the upcoming campaign, our frustrations with management, and the challenges of staying creative in a corporate environment. But as the night went on, the tone shifted. You're different, you know, he said, his voice low as he swirled the wine in his glass. Different how? I asked, my pulse quickening. You're not like the others, he said, leaning forward. You don't just play the game, you redefine it. That's rare. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, equal parts flattery and discomfort. I've been doing this a long time. It's not just experience, he said, it's you. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. He was looking at me like I was the only person in the room, and it terrified me how much I liked it. Deshawn, I said softly, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But he didn't let me. You ever let yourself have what you really want? He asked, his gaze unwavering. The question caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond. Before I could, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine. I think you deserve that, he said quietly. The night ended in the parking lot. We walked out together, the cool night air doing little to calm the heat building between us. When we reached my car, I turned to him, searching for the words to put an end to whatever this was becoming. But before I could speak, he closed the distance between us, his hands gently gripping my waist as he kissed me. It wasn't tentative or hesitant. It was confident, deliberate, and completely overwhelming. I felt myself melting into him, my hands clutching his shoulders as every rational thought disappeared. When we finally broke apart, I stared at him, breathless and trembling. "We can't do this," I whispered, though my body was screaming for the opposite. "Why not?" he asked, his voice steady. "Because it's wrong," I said, my words weak even to my own ears. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. The way he looked at me, like I was something rare, something worth breaking the rules for, was enough to silence every protest. The first time we were together was in his car. I didn't plan it. In fact, I'd sworn to myself that I wouldn't let it happen. But a few nights after that kiss, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. "I had to see you," he said, standing in the doorway, his presence both thrilling and terrifying. I tried to send him away, but the words died in my throat. Before I knew it, I was in the passenger seat of his car, the city lights blurring as we drove to a secluded spot overlooking the skyline. What happened next was inevitable. The car was small, the space between us even smaller. His touch was gentle but insistent, his lips tracing a path down my neck as I leaned back against the seat. I couldn't stop myself, didn't want to stop myself, as he made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. When it was over, we sat in silence, the windows fogged and the air thick with the weight of what we'd done. "I've wanted this since the day I met you," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. I didn't respond. I couldn't. After that night, everything changed. We couldn't keep away from each other. It started with stolen moments at the office, brushing past each other in the hallway, his hand lingering on mine during meetings, the way his gaze would burn into me from across the room. Then came the late-night rendezvous. His apartment, my car, quiet corners of the office after everyone had gone home. Every encounter was a risk, but the danger only made it more intoxicating. I told myself it was just a phase, something I'd end before it went too far. But with every touch, every kiss, every whispered confession, I felt myself falling deeper into him. I thought we could keep it quiet, that we could manage the risks, but nothing about being with Deshawn felt manageable. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me, yet I couldn't bring myself to step back. We'd fallen into a rhythm, one built on secrecy and stolen moments. It started with nights at his apartment. His place was small, almost minimalist, the kind of apartment that screamed young bachelor. The walls were bare except for a couple of posters from indie games, and his shelves were filled with books on coding and design. The first time I was there, I couldn't stop myself from laughing softly as I looked around. "What's so funny?" he asked, his arms sliding around my waist from behind. "You live like a college kid," I teased, turning to face him. "And you love it," he said, his grin mischievous as he leaned in to kiss me. He wasn't wrong. Our nights together were electric. He made me feel things I hadn't felt in decades. Alive, wanted, like I was something more than just my title at work, or the woman who filled her evenings with wine and old movies. But it wasn't just about the physical connection. Deshawn had a way of looking at me, of making me feel seen, that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "You know what I love about you?" he said one night as we lay tangled together, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. "What's that?" I asked, my voice soft. "You don't settle," he said. "You go after what you want, even if it scares you." His words stuck with me, lingering in the back of my mind long after I left his apartment that night. It wasn't long before we started pushing the boundaries of our secrecy. At work, we were careful, or at least, we tried to be. But the moments between us, the glances and brief touches, felt impossible to hide. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone in the elevator after a team meeting. The tension was palpable, the air between us crackling with unspoken desire. "Someone could see us," I whispered, my back pressed against the wall as he stepped closer. "They won't," he said, his voice low, his hand brushing against mine. The elevator doors opened before anything could happen, and we stepped out, pretending nothing had transpired. But my heart was racing for the rest of the day. It wasn't just at work. Deshawn started getting bolder, suggesting riskier places to meet. One evening, after a long day at the office, he texted me, "Meet me at the Vista." The Vista was a luxury hotel downtown, one known for its privacy and discretion. I hesitated, staring at the message, knowing how reckless it was, but the pull of him was too strong to resist. The hotel room was sleek and modern, the city skyline stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The moment I stepped inside, he was there, pulling me into his arms, his kiss searing away any lingering doubts. This is crazy, I murmured against his lips, my hands clutching at his shirt. I don't care, he said, his voice filled with conviction. I just want you. The rest of the night was a blur of heat and passion, the kind of intensity that left me breathless and craving more. As the weeks went on, our connection only deepened. It wasn't just about the physical anymore, though that was still a driving force. We started sharing more of ourselves, peeling back the layers of who we were outside of work. He told me about his childhood, growing up in Atlanta with a single mom who worked 2 jobs to support him and his sister. About the indie game he'd built in college that never quite took off, but taught him everything he needed to know about perseverance. I told him about my divorce, about how I'd spent years putting my career ahead of everything else, only to end up alone in a house that felt too big for one person. You're not alone now, he said one night, his hand resting on mine. The simplicity of his words hit me harder than I expected. But the deeper we fell, the more complicated things became. Deshaun started wanting more time together, more openness about our relationship. We don't have to keep sneaking around, he said one night as we lay in bed, the glow of the city lights casting shadows across the room. You know we do, I said, turning to face him. If anyone finds out. I don't care what people think, he said, cutting me off. I care about you. His words should have comforted me, but instead, they filled me with dread. The risks we were taking didn't go unnoticed. Carla, my best friend at work, started asking questions. She'd always been perceptive, and it didn't take long for her to notice the subtle shifts in my behavior. You've been distracted lately, she said one afternoon as we grabbed coffee in the break room. Just busy, I said, avoiding her gaze. It's more than that, she pressed. What's going on, Evelyn? I hesitated, debating whether to tell her the truth, but the weight of what I was hiding felt too heavy to share. Nothing, I said finally. I'm fine. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push further. Then there was Amber. Amber was one of the younger employees on the team, sharp and ambitious, but prone to gossip. I'd noticed her watching me and Deshaun more closely in recent weeks, her eyes narrowing whenever we were in the same room. One afternoon, as I walked past her desk, I heard her whispering to another coworker. The words were muffled, but I caught enough to know what she was saying. She's old enough to be his mother, Amber said, her tone dripping with disdain. The comment stung more than I wanted to admit. Despite the growing tension, I couldn't bring myself to end things. Deshaun had become a lifeline, a source of light in a life that had felt stagnant for so long. But as the walls around us started closing in, I began to wonder how much longer we could keep this up before everything came crashing down. I knew it was going to fall apart. Things like this always do. We'd been careless, or maybe it was inevitable. You can only slip through the cracks for so long before someone notices. And at apex, the cracks were smaller than I realized. It started with a confrontation I didn't see coming. Amber, the ambitious and sharp-tongued coworker who had been watching Deshaun and me for weeks, caught me in the hallway after a team meeting. Evelyn, can I talk to you for a second? She asked, her voice all sweetness, but her smile razor-sharp. I nodded, though her tone set me on edge. Of course. We stepped into an empty conference room, and as soon as the door shut, her expression hardened. I'm going to get straight to the point, she said, her voice low. I know about you and Deshaun. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head, her smile widening. You don't have to play dumb with me. I've seen the way you look at him, the way he looks at you. People are starting to talk, Evelyn. You might want to think about how that looks for someone in your position. Her words carried a thinly veiled threat, and I knew exactly what she was implying. This isn't appropriate, I said sharply. If you have an issue with me, take it to HR. Oh, don't worry, she said, her eyes narrowing. I will. Unless, of course, you decide to resign before things get messy. I stared at her, my chest tightening. She was bluffing, or at least I hoped she was. That evening, I met Deshaun at his apartment, my mind racing with what Amber had said. She's just trying to scare you, he said, pacing the small living room. She doesn't have proof. She doesn't need proof, I said, my voice trembling. All she has to do is raise questions, and my career is over. Deshaun stopped, turning to face me. Then let me handle it, I'll tell HR it was all me, that I pursued you. No, I said firmly. I won't let you ruin your career for me. He stepped closer, his hands gripping my shoulders. I don't care about my career, Evelyn. I care about you. His words were meant to comfort me, but they only made the weight on my chest heavier. A week later, everything came crashing down. It was a Friday morning and I was sitting at my desk when an email from HR popped into my inbox. Subject: HR inquiry, confidential. My stomach dropped. The email was short and to the point. Evelyn, please report to HR at 3 p.m. today to discuss an internal matter. This is a mandatory meeting. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This was it. I called Deshawn immediately. They know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What are you going to do? He asked finally. I don't know, I admitted. The meeting was worse than I'd imagined. 3 HR reps sat across from me in a cold, windowless room. The head of HR, a stern woman named Victoria, slid a folder across the table. Evelyn, we've received reports of inappropriate conduct involving you and a subordinate employee, she said, her tone even but firm. I opened the folder, my breath catching as I saw the printed screenshots of text messages and emails between Deshawn and me. Where did you get these? I asked, my voice shaking. Victoria didn't answer. We need you to confirm whether these messages are legitimate, she said. I hesitated, my mind racing. Denying it would only make things worse. Yes, I said finally, my voice barely audible. They're real. Victoria nodded, her expression unreadable. Thank you for your honesty. We'll be conducting a full review of this matter and will follow up with you once a decision has been made. The meeting ended, and as I walked out of the room, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a stone. That evening, I met Deshawn at a bar downtown. The normally confident, easygoing man I'd fallen for looked tense, his jaw tight as he waited for me to sit down. What did they say? He asked, his voice low. They're reviewing it, I said. But we both know what that means. He reached for my hand, his grip firm but gentle. Let me fix this, he said. I'll tell them it was all me. No, I said, shaking my head. We both made this choice, Deshawn. We'll deal with the consequences together. For the first time, he didn't argue. The fallout came quickly. By Monday morning, the rumors had spread throughout the office. Whispers followed me wherever I went, and the once friendly smiles of my coworkers had turned to cold stares. Carla, my closest friend at work, stopped by my office that afternoon. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice filled with hurt. I didn't want to drag you into it, I said, my eyes welling with tears. She sighed, shaking her head. I don't know what you were thinking, Evelyn, but I hope it was worth it. Her words stung, but I couldn't blame her. By the end of the week, HR made their decision. I was given 2 options: resign quietly or face termination. I chose the former. Deshawn was suspended for a month, but allowed to keep his job, though he was reassigned to a different team. I told him not to fight it, that it was better this way. This isn't fair, he said, his voice filled with frustration. It's the best we can hope for, I said quietly. As I packed up my office, the reality of what I'd lost began to sink in. My career, my reputation, the life I'd built over decades, it was all gone. Deshawn offered to leave with me, to start fresh somewhere else. But I told him no. You still have a future here, I said. Don't throw that away for me. He didn't agree, but he didn't argue either. The day I left Apex Interactive, I walked out of the building feeling both lighter and heavier than I'd ever felt before. I didn't know what was next, but I knew one thing for sure. There was no going back. In the weeks after I left Apex Interactive, the world around me seemed to slow down. My mornings were no longer filled with meetings or the buzz of emails. Instead, I found myself sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, staring out at a city that had kept moving while my life had come to a standstill. I had spent decades building my career, pouring everything into becoming someone I could be proud of. But now, all I could see were the cracks, mistakes I couldn't undo, decisions that had unraveled everything I thought I was. Deshawn called often, but I let most of his calls go to voicemail. It's not your fault, he said in one message, his voice heavy with guilt. You know that, right? This wasn't all on you. But it didn't feel that way. Every time I heard his voice, I thought about the choices we'd made, the risks we'd taken, and the way it had all fallen apart. Still, I couldn't bring myself to cut him off completely. He was a reminder of something I couldn't quite let go. A piece of me that I didn't want to admit I missed. Sophia, my daughter, heard about what happened from a former coworker. "Mom," she said during one of our weekly calls, her voice hesitant. "Is it true? What they're saying about you and someone from work?" I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "Yes," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to see me like this," I said, tears threatening to spill. "I don't care about that," she said, her tone softening. "I just want to understand why." I struggled to find the words, to explain how lonely I'd felt, how Deshaun had made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. But I couldn't say any of that without sounding selfish. "I made a mistake," I said finally. "A big one." Sophia sighed, the disappointment in her voice cutting through me. "I love you, Mom, but I think you need to figure out what you want, because this isn't who you are." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. One evening, a month after I'd left Apex, I received a text from Deshaun. "I miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions warring between longing and guilt. I missed him too, missed the way he made me feel, the way he looked at me like I was something extraordinary. But I also knew that being with him had cost me everything. I typed out a response, deleting it twice before finally sending, "I need time." He replied almost immediately, "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." In the months that followed, I began to piece my life back together. I found freelance work, small projects that kept me busy but didn't demand the kind of intensity my career at Apex had required. I spent more time with Sophia, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been strained between us. And I learned how to sit with myself, with the loneliness, the regret, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to start over. The last time I heard from Deshaun was on a rainy Tuesday evening. He sent me a single message: "I hope you're okay, I'll always care about you." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed to let him go. As much as I had loved the way he made me feel, I knew it was time to find that sense of worth within myself. In the end, what Deshaun gave me wasn't just passion or excitement, it was a reminder that I was still capable of feeling, of taking risks, of being vulnerable. But now it was up to me to figure out what came next.